I am here to let you know that my silence is nothing more than wisdom and self-control so that we can win the war that is up ahead. And I am looking forward to presenting over 350 pieces of proof on what Micah thinks about her family and what Micah thinks about her lawyer and the things her lawyer's saying and the things that her family's saying and Charlotte and all these other people that are saying things. People forget that Micah corresponded with me more than anybody else on planet Earth. And I know her heart. And I have her text messages, and we're going to disprove all the lies that are out there. And there's so many lies, it seems like everybody thinks the world is flat. But when I get to court, I'm going to show you that the world is round. And you're going to be shocked at some of the things that you see that Micah says. And we're going to find out actually who is responsible for my wife's death. And Micah will have justice when it's all said and done, and I'm going to make sure of it.
Hello and welcome back to another Coffee with Crime podcast. I'm Brittany and today we're going to be doing a follow-up video on the Micah Miller case. So if you saw my first video, I covered a ton of details and honestly, it's one of those cases, I said this in my first video, if you keep digging, you will continue to find dirt. Specifically on Pastor John Paul Miller. I have continued to research and I have just over and over and over again found more dirt on this man. It blows my mind that he is continuing to walk free. So I'm going to cover some more details in today's video, some stuff that I wasn't able to cover in the first episode. I know that still I won't be getting into everything in this video because it's so much and I want to make sure that I'm really thorough with the way that I present the material because it matters to me. It definitely matters to me. I think that Micah and her family really deserve justice and I'm really bothered by the fact that so far it doesn't seem like they are getting any of it. John Paul is still walking around playing the victim, pointing the finger at Micah and just calling it mental health issues. If you're paying attention, I'm sure you're bothered by it too. What a corrupt, evil man. I am in a different setting than my last video. A few of you commented that the echo on that episode was really bad and I apologize. I was in my office, not in a bathroom like someone thought. It is my office, but I do admit that the echo in that room is really poor. Unfortunately, it's such a great space, but it needs some work. And so I'm actually in my bedroom at the moment recording this, but I have a whole setup coming for my office, some like acoustic padding for the walls and a little bit of a new mic setup. So this is just a temporary thing, but hopefully it's an improvement at least for my last video because I know that it was really bothersome to some of you, including myself. Listening back, I was annoyed by the echo as well, so I apologize. Regardless, I didn't want to wait until I had the office finished because there's just so much to cover and I want to stay current with it. So yeah, like I said, if you continue to dig into this man and dig into this case, you will find more and more details that will just piss you off. There were so many warning signs, so many red flags. Micah made so many calls for help. And unfortunately, the people that did try and help her, like her family, her friends, were not able to save her, and the people that really should have stepped in and may have been able to do more, like the multiple police departments that she made reports with that could have made possibly an arrest or just did a better job at protecting Micah, they could have made a difference. Of course, it's too late to know now, but you do have to wonder that had the police department stepped in and did more to intervene and protect Micah, if she would still be here with us today. So in the months leading up to Micah's death, she made multiple police reports against JP for stalking and harassing her, yet somehow it was just never enough to really incriminate JP and get him arrested. So the first police report made by Micah that we're going to go over was on March 3rd, and in the report she details how JP was stalking and harassing her. So he was sending her these harassing text messages. So she received the first text message from JP while she was out to dinner with her family at a local restaurant called the Wicked Tuna, and they were having an oyster roast. The first text from JP read, "Enjoy your oysters." clearly, you know, showing that he was watching her. And then the other text message that she received from him on that day was, "How was Valorous?" which was a church that she had visited and gone to that morning. Again, just showing that he had been following her throughout the day and obviously trying to scare her. He wasn't only stalking, following her, watching her every move, but he wanted to let her know. He wanted to make it clear that he was stalking her, that he was following her, and he really just wanted to scare Mica. I mean, that alone should really irk something inside of you. Mica was just trying to enjoy time with her family, trying to go to church, which we know was something so important to her, and just trying to find peace, as she oftentimes preached to find peace and be with God and be with her family, and he just wouldn't leave her alone. He took all this extra effort, all this extra time. Instead of putting any of that energy into anything good, he took that time to torment Mica and just did not allow her to have any peace.
As soon as they got married, her behavior went downhill fast as far as being her lively, jovial self. She seemed to be more sad, more under control, didn't seem to be her free self. She would do something amazing and he would shut it down. I just believe he really compressed her. I really believe that he just sucked the life right out of her.
The next report was on March 5th, so this was 2 days later, and this came from Mica again. She had found a large razor in her passenger side tire, along with, again, multiple texts, calls, emails, and letters. So again, she did her due diligence and filed that report to let the officers know that she was being stalked and harassed. And then on March 11th, she made another police report. So now this is just in a span of 9 days, Mica had made 3 separate police reports. So this is the incident where she states that she found 3 more razors in her tire. He had keyed the back of her car. She had located a tracking device on her car, and he had even left her a letter accusing her of having an affair with a teenager. This was all documented in the report from Mica on the 11th, which of course the irony there with all of the allegations against John Paul for having these encounters with underage girls. It really is one of those scenarios where the guilty scream the loudest. He was projecting, and I really think that everything that he accused Mica of, in fact, it was him that was guilty of those behaviors. And then if you remember back in my first video, I mentioned that JP followed her to a gas station and also to the magistrate's office where she went to file her restraining order. Well, something I didn't mention in that video was that he actually also followed her to the dealership where she went to have her car fixed from the damage that he had caused to her vehicle. So yeah, he actually followed her to the dealership, and at this time Mica actually took out her phone to record JP. And of course, like the coward that he is, he took off running when she broke out her phone. But some of that footage was released, and I just came across it, and I wanted to share it here because not only does it show how cowardly Pastor John Paul is, it also shows us that he was threatening her there as well. And so let's just take a look at it now, and we'll talk about it after.
Walk away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to jail?
They'll be on Facebook in a few hours.
Alrighty, you'll be in jail in a few hours. Walk away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to jail?
They'll be on Facebook in a few hours.
Alrighty, you'll be in jail in a few hours. Walk away.
So yeah, in that video, it sounds like John Paul is threatening to post pictures of Mica on Facebook, which we know he actually did do. She filed a report against John Paul on April 8th for posting a lewd picture of her on Facebook, obviously against her will and without her consent, because he's an evil, sick man, and he was just so vindictive against her. But she did file that report, and so that was, I think, what he was threatening in this video, was that he had pictures of her that he was going to share on the internet. But another part of this video that was really frustrating to me was the part where she said, okay, well, you'll be in jail in a few hours, in response to him threatening to share these private pictures of her on the internet. Her assuming, again, of course, that the police department would come in and protect her from being harassed and stalked and just exploited on the internet. And so, yeah, she believed that somebody was going to step in and protect her and incriminate him, it's just so frustrating because we know that's not the case. We know that he did not get arrested, and we know, again, he's still out there walking as a free man. And then after this incident, when Micah was giving her report to the police officer, again, about being stalked and harassed, again, by John Paul, and while she was trying to go through the motion of filing a restraining order against this man, she got a phone call from a blocked phone number while she was talking to the police officer about being stalked and harassed multiple times. A blocked number called her, and guess who it was? It does not take a genius to figure out. Obviously, it was Pastor John Paul was, of course, the one that was calling her under the blocked number. And so she answered, handed it over to the police officer, where the police officer warned John Paul that if he kept it up, that he could face charges. And according to the report from the police officer, after this incident, John Paul acknowledged that he needed to stop harassing and stalking her. Also, he included in the police report that Micah made mention that she was fearing for her life at this time. The officer warned John Paul. Why was this just a warning? Why wasn't he being put in cuffs and arrested? I don't understand. He was clearly endangering her, stalking, harassing, tormenting, exploiting. She said it out of her mouth. I am fearful for my life. And the officer warned him over the phone to knock it off. A slap on the wrist. Does he have these officers in his pocket? You have to wonder. How is he so flamboyantly walking around and getting away with all of this? And a quick search of John Paul would show you that this wasn't an isolated incident. Even if it were, that would be bad enough, but it wasn't. He is a habitual harasser and stalker and exploiter of women. This is not a first time, and because he's not being incriminated and charged and arrested and put behind bars where he belongs, it could very well not be the last time. Out of curiosity, I did look up the South Carolina stalking and harassment laws, and you can see the article that I was reading here. But it says that harassment or stalking is when a person repeatedly contacts or even follows another person, causing them emotional distress or fear. So harassment in the second degree is a pattern of intentional, substantial, and unreasonable intrusion into the private life of a targeted person, serves no legitimate purpose, and causes the person to suffer mental or emotional distress. So it can include emails, text messages, phone calls, any other type of unwanted communications. And penalties for this second degree harassment can range from a maximum of 30 days to a maximum of 1 year in prison if the person has a prior conviction for either harassment or stalking within the past 10 years, or if they were violating a restraining order at the time of the offense. So first degree harassment, this is more serious than second degree harassment. It usually involves physical contact or following the victim. So this can include following the alleged victim from place to place, visual or physical contact that is continued after the person has been notified that it is unwanted, or after an incident report had been filed, surveillance of the alleged victim, or maintaining a presence at the alleged victim's home, work, school, or any other place regularly occupied or visited by the victim, which we definitely know that John Paul was tracking Micah. Vandalism, property damage, like keying someone's car, slashing their tires. We know JP also was guilty of this. And then the penalties for a first-degree harassment conviction can range from a maximum of 3 years in prison if there's no prior record to a maximum of 5 years of prison if the person has a prior conviction for harassment or stalking within the past 10 years. Stalking, this could consist of unwanted communications or physical presence. The difference between harassment and stalking is the degree of fear that the person's actions are intended to cause. So stalking is a pattern of words, whether it be verbal, written, or electronic, or a pattern of conduct that serves no legitimate purpose and is intended to cause the targeted person to either fear death, assault, bodily injury, criminal sexual contact, kidnapping, or damage to the person's property. So stalking is the most severe of the offenses. This can carry up to 5 years in prison if there's no prior record or restraining order. It can be up to 10 years in prison if the person is under a restraining order at the time of the offense, or up to 15 years in prison if the person has a prior conviction for harassment or stalking with the past 10 years. And so it's really interesting to read because we know how many reports had been filed from not only Micah but also Allison regarding John Paul stalking and harassing them. It does us no good though if there's no convictions in place. John Paul needs to be held accountable and there needs to be convictions given for the stalking and harassing. He stalked and harassed Micah so much so that he was continuing to harass Micah even while she was literally in the process of filing a restraining order against him. If you are not hearing this information and feeling anger, I don't know. And now I'm not saying that Micah did or did not end her life. Unfortunately, I can see how it's possible and why she would feel so hopeless at this time of her life. She was crying out for help. She was reaching out for help so many times and it was going unanswered. She made report after report to the local police departments for harassment because she was essentially living in this constant state of fear and torment from John Paul, and as much as she wanted something to get done, the police forces just continued to turn a blind eye to it. And I just can't make sense of it. I just can't understand why, unless he had some sort of connections that was giving him an out. And it's clear that John Paul was definitely tracking her. Multiple tracking devices had been found on her vehicle. And so when you consider that, it's very, very possible that John Paul knew when she had went to purchase the... I'm sure he did know that she went and purchased that for her father says her own protection.
Here's where the shell casings and the live round were, which also doesn't make sense. She knew how to use a weapon. She got the weapon for self-protection. She told me days beforehand, Dad, I really feel like I need a weapon for protection. And she knows how to use it. She's qualified. She's been through training. She's not going to charge the weapon and eject a live round.
But if he was still tracking her, which I don't see why he wouldn't be, that was definitely a pattern of his, then he very well could have known that she had went and purchased that. And hypothetically, he could have used that to his benefit somehow, knowing that she did have that, and used it to paint this narrative or continue to paint the narrative that it was Micah that was mentally unwell and wanted to end her own life. And I'm not saying that she didn't have mental health problems, because who doesn't struggle with anxiety, depression? There are so many of us that do struggle with mental health problems. But, I think he just really held on to that narrative that's why Micah would have done this, and that proves that Micah did take her own life. When I think it's very plausible that there could be more to this story that, of course, we are not getting, but her family really strongly believes that there is more to this story, and they don't believe that she took her own life.
There were definitely bruises on Micah's hands that the medical examiner had no recollection of, and I did ask him personally, is there any chance that a body would have bruises on it from collecting from the water or someone touching her after examine her or anything? And he said there's no chance of a body bruising after the heart stops.
Micah's mother, Angelita, she said, pretend this is Micah's hand. And she asked me, grab this hand. And then she pulled it up, and said, it looks like someone squeezed her hand and raised it up and shot. And there are defensive wounds from it and such. And that's the general idea of our theory, that somebody crushed her hand to hold the gun up to her head while she's fighting. Either them or someone else held her other hand or her other arm back because there's bruising on it from squeezing, and they forced it to look like that was self-inflicted.
So over here would be where her remains were found down the river, and then all the way through this trail, all the way up here was where her purse and her phone was found.
And this water is not moving. It's just
Not at all.
stagnant water.
It's not moving at all. The theory of suicide does not add up to me, because you're telling me her body floated all the way down this stagnant water, and her belongings were all the way up here. We had to walk down a trail, a separate trail, climb through all this mud and trees and fallen debris to even get to where her body was, down the water. It's not like she could have, left her belongings and walked down the water and then committed suicide down here, and then somehow the bullets and everything stayed over there. There's no
And the gun was found up here.
There's no logical explanation for this.
Another recent development in the Micah Miller case was a press conference that was held about a week ago by Micah Miller's family attorney, Regina Ward. So from the sounds of it, she is not necessarily putting efforts into any allegations regarding Micah's cause of death, but instead she's really emphasizing and urging lawmakers to pass something referred to as Micah's Law. So 4 years ago, a South Carolina lawmaker, they filed a bill that would criminalize coercive control. And then since that initial filing, the law has been basically stalled from passing multiple different times. However, Attorney Ward argues that had this coercive bill been in place, officers might have had an easier time charging John Paul with criminal abuse towards Micah.
What is the coercive control bill? Coercive control refers to a pattern of behavior used by one person to dominate, manipulate, and intimidate another within an intimate or familial relationship. It encompasses acts such as assault, threats, humiliation, emotional abuse, and isolation. The goal is to harm, punish, and frighten your victim. The bill has been put in a folder in a dust-covered box in a back corner of the closet in the Judiciary Committee's office. I challenged them to go back there and find it and bring it out and assign a committee to it. Let's get this done. It is important. It is extremely important.
Ward goes on to say that the coercive bill could use some improvements, and she wants to create Micah's Law, which would incorporate content from this coercive bill, but it would also add material from Micah's list. And so Micah's list is essentially data taken from Micah's personal journals, where she documented different forms of abuse from JP.
I have developed what's called Micah's list. Micah's list tracks what the bill says. And we put together things that she journaled, diaried, or put together to say happened. Our domestic violence statute is archaic. We got to get it up to times, up to today standards, taking into consideration all the things and ways that a person who wants to control and intimidate can use.
And although there's nothing that John Paul could do or say now that would obviously bring Micah back, but he has not taken any accountability, at least not publicly that I have found thus far. He has not taken any accountability for his actions, and he still continues to play the victim. We have very tangible evidence that he was abusing her and stalking and harassing her, and he has not apologized or taken any accountability. He still plays a victim. That it makes your blood boil. Like, anyone that comes across this man in real life, how he could have friends, how he could have colleagues, how he could have people that would be even interested in going to his church or future church, because apparently if you visit his Facebook, they are working on building another church or another location. Anyone that could continue to be a part of this man's life, knowing what they know, how? He is an evil, immoral man. And he has made no attempt for any kind of apology or accountability for his actions. He is a habitual predator, and he needs to have consequences for his actions, or you really can't help but think that this will be repeated behaviors in the future. But yeah, I think that is going to be all for today's video. Like I said, if you took 20 minutes to dig on this man and search, you would find more. There is more. Eyes need to be on John Paul. He needs to be held accountable. Eyes need to be on the Horry Police Department and the Myrtle Beach Police Department. People need to be asking questions and looking at them for answers. Why is he not behind bars? Why is he not facing any consequences for his actions? Pastor John Paul Miller is a habitual predator, and he does not deserve to walk free.
Iniquity is what's on the inside that nobody sees but God. Transgression is what you do with it. Let me say this: if greed is the iniquity, then taking the tithe that belongs to God and spending it somewhere else, that's the transgression, stealing. If hatred is the iniquity, murder is the transgression. You see what I'm doing? Inside, outside. If lust is the iniquity, immorality is the transgression. Okay? If hatred is the iniquity, murder is the transgression. You see what I'm doing?
Murder is the transgression.